You know, every day we seem to hear about some new tragedy in India. A building collapses, there's a fire at a factory, another horrible accident on the road. And we feel this quick jolt of shock, right? But then the news cycle just moves on. So what if these aren't just one-off incidents? What if they're actually symptoms of a much, much deeper systemic problem? In this explainer, we're going to dig into that really tough question. Why have so many preventable deaths become, well, just routine?
This quote, wow, it really frames everything we're about to talk about. It draws a line in the sand, between a system that actually protects its people and one that, well, doesn't. And it forces us to ask, which side of that line are we really on?
And according to the analysis we're exploring today, the answer is pretty clear. And honestly, it's unsettling. The sheer number, the frequency of these tragedies, it suggests we're not treating them like exceptions anymore. They've become expected, almost like a statistical certainty.
So, how in the world did this happen? How does the unthinkable become just another Tuesday? Let's get into our first section and explore this normalization of tragedy.
Look, these aren't random acts of God or some kind of unavoidable accident. They are predictable failures that happen in very predictable places. We're talking about roads with no real safety enforcement, buildings that go up without proper checks, factories cutting corners on safety, and trains or buses packed way beyond capacity. The pattern is always the same. The systems that are supposed to protect people are failing again and again, and we've almost come to expect it.
And this brings us to a really crucial and kind of uncomfortable psychological idea. It's called the psychology of replaceability. In a country with a massive population, a dangerous mental shortcut can start to happen at a systemic level. It's not that people aren't compassionate one-on-one, but the system itself, it starts to see lives as numbers, not names. When there are so many people, empathy can get stretched thin, and the loss of one person is unconsciously seen as just a spot that will soon be filled by someone else.
So, that psychological backdrop, it leads directly to the absolute core of the problem. Let's move into our second section here and see how this all creates what you could call an accountability vacuum, a system where, believe it or not, being negligent can actually be the most logical choice.
This comparison right here, this gets to the absolute heart of it. In a healthy system, safety is something you feel inside. People ask, is this safe? For me, for my family, for others? But in a system with no real accountability, safety just becomes an external rule you try to get around. The question completely changes. It goes from, is this safe, to will I get caught? And that one little shift in perspective, it explains almost everything.
Right. So this lack of accountability creates what are called perverse incentives. I mean, think about it. Why would you spend money on proper fire escapes or stronger building materials when the penalty for not doing it is basically nothing? Risk becomes cheaper than prevention. Why would an official make a tough call to enforce a safety rule when they might get blamed, but delaying the decision has zero consequence? Delay is safer than a decision. And why would you speak up for reform when staying quiet gets you rewarded? The system itself makes being careless a totally rational economic and political calculation.
And this is the chilling result. These tragedies, they don't break the system. In a very real way, they're a predictable output of the system. The whole thing isn't designed to prevent them. It's designed to absorb them with some temporary outrage, a little compensation money, and then it's right back to business as usual.
Okay, so that's the problem, and it's a big one. But how do you even begin to fix something like this? Let's pivot now in our third section and look through what our source calls the repair lens. This basically means looking at how other societies successfully fixed this exact same issue. Okay, so check out these two fascinating historical examples. You've got 19th century Germany and post-war Japan. Germany's solution was all about the money. They brought in strict liability laws and mandatory insurance that made accidents incredibly expensive for businesses. If a worker died, it was going to hit your bottom line, and hit it hard. Japan, on the other hand, took a different approach. It was all about institutional discipline. They enforced a zero-tolerance policy for safety violations, and they framed being careful as a civic duty, a sign of respect for your fellow citizens. So you have two totally different paths, but they both led to the exact same outcome, making human life valued.
And this is the absolute key takeaway. These societies didn't just wake up one day and decide to be more moral or caring. No, they changed because the rules of the game changed.
The incentives were totally restructured to make safety the most logical, the most profitable, and the most socially responsible choice. The culture followed the new laws, not the other way around.
So what can we learn from all this? Let's get to our final section and see how these principles could be transferred to create a new, better standard of care for today.
So what it really boils down to are 4 clear, actionable principles, not just some vague hopes. First, you have to remove discretion from safety enforcement. The rules have to apply automatically, every time. Second, there must be real, unavoidable consequences, financially and legally, tied directly to a preventable death. Third, that accountability has to go all the way to the top, no excuses. And finally, real change comes when institutions lead by example, not by giving lectures.
This all brings us to one last big question to think about. We talk all the time about GDP, economic growth, innovation, our standing on the world stage. But what if the most fundamental measure of a society's character is something else entirely?
Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the first question we should always ask. Before anything else, does the system you live in make it truly, prohibitively expensive, legally, financially, and morally, to waste a human life? Because until the answer to that question is a definite yes, all those other achievements, well, they might just be resting on some pretty fragile ground. A powerful thought to end